This is an updated video about firearms and how they made it all over Africa. Now, of course, what I'm going to talk about is something a little more interesting than the Europeans that ended up in the Kingdom of Congo and gave people those firearms, because, of course, it gets deeper than that. It is so deep that actually I can't mention every single place. So, of course, as we know, the Chinese basically invented guns. They invented various versions of them, some less useful than others. And of course, they decided to invent the bullet. And how did they do this? Well, they started adding certain stones, pottery shards, and all kinds of things inside to get projected out with this type of weapon. Before this, they also used these as fireworks and the like. It was only during the Yuan dynasty that the Chinese started using these way more. And when the Mongols came, they became real active and deadly weapons of war. But the Mongols didn't just do that. They spread the gun all over the world. In fact, this is how we think the gun got to Europe. It's possible that the gun had already stretched as far as the Middle East prior to the Mongols going there, because there is mention of a fire weapon by a Muslim scholar prior to the Mongols showing up. So it's not obvious that they were sent there directly by the Mongols. But we do know that the Mongols populated them or popularized them after their take of Baghdad. The Mongols really spread this weapon far and wide. Almost every place that they had entered, we see the locals finally adopting this weapon. Even though they had heard of it before, they really at this time took it seriously. For example, the Japanese, when the Mongols came to invade, describe seeing fire coming out of things that they were holding or pipes that they were holding in their hands. And these pipes were loud and could startle people and make them invade each other. The Javanese, which is different than Japanese, were actually more than this for the Japanese because they adopted the gun in a deeper way than the other people. What they did when the Chinese came back after the Mongols had stopped, what they did was create armies that were armed with hand cannons, and the Chinese wrote about them at the time. And so when the Mongols had invaded Indonesia and places like that, those people learned from the Mongols and decided, yep, we need to get there. Now, of course, there's two types. There's the hand cannon, which was the most used because obviously it's easier to produce. But then there was the cannon, the one that's put on the ground and is known as a bombard. This bombard spread throughout everywhere as well. It wasn't just the hand cannon. And this bombard was also known in India by the 1300s. And this is how this hand cannon or this bombard made its way to Africa. Now, the Christians of India by the 1300s traded with Africa all the time. A lot of the Indians that came from India did not really come from the great capitals of India, but instead they came from Calicut and Kerala, places that are facing Africa today. These places would also have a deep impact on Africa, especially with the cannon. In fact, we have one European sailor who describes seeing these bombards in a friendly Christian neighborhood of Africa. The name is Malindi or Malinde, depending on how you want to say it, but Malindi is the common way. Malindi was open to anybody for trade. In fact, the first person to ever land there who wrote a lot about what he saw was Zheng He, the famous explorer. Zheng He would have been armed with these weapons as well, but we have no proof that he introduced them to these people or even showed them any of them. What we do know, though, is that some of the DNA of the people of Zheng He was left back in Africa, and Zheng He sailed back to China once again. But something people don't think about is why would he even come this direction? We know that he went to places that were already known to China when he was traveling. He voyaged not just randomly, because he could have ended up in America or anywhere else, like some of the Europeans would later end up trying to go in any direction. But instead, he went to places that China was very familiar with already. So, what about the gun? Well, ignoring this event that happened before the Portuguese ever landed in Africa, it's the Portuguese themselves, like I said, who describe seeing bombards in Africa. The first person was Vasco da Gama to land in Malindi. When he got to Malindi, running away from Mombasa and all the other hostile areas, he found friendly people. Now, there's two things I want to correct that I hear a lot of people saying about Malindi. One of them is they say an Indian sailor took Vasco da Gama from this location to India. That is not true. And two, I want to correct this thing that the guns were introduced by the Portuguese. So let's read. On Thursday, April 19th, the Captain Major and Nicolas Collet rowed along the front of the town, bombards having been placed in the poop of their longboats. Many people were along the shore, and among them 2 horsemen who appeared to take much delight in a sham fight. The king was carried in a palanquin from the stone steps of his place to the side of the captain major's boats. He again begged the captain to come ashore, as he had a helpless father who wanted to see him, and that he and his sons would go on board the ships as hostages. The captain, however, excused himself. We found here 4 vessels belonging to Indian Christians. When they came for the first time on board Paulo de Gama's ship, the captain major being there at the time, they were shown an altarpiece representing Our Lady at the foot of the cross, with Jesus Christ in her arms and the apostles around her. When the Indians saw this picture, they prostrated themselves, and as long as we were there, they came to say their prayers in front of it, bringing offerings of cloves, pepper, and other things. These Indians are tawny men. They were built, they wear but little clothing, and have long beards and long hair, which they braid. They told us that they ate no beef. Their language differs from that of the Arabs, but some of them know a little of it, as they hold much intercourse with them. On the day on which the captain major went up to the town in the boats, these Christian Indians fired off many bombards from their vessels, and when they saw him pass, they raised their hands and shouted justly, Christ, Christ. That same night, they asked the king's permission to give us a night fete, and when the night came, they fired off many bombards, sent up rockets, and raised loud shouts. These Indians warned the captain major against going on shore and told him not to trust their fanfares, as they neither came from their hearts nor from their goodwill. On the following Sunday, 22nd of April, the King Zavra brought on board one of his confidential servants, and as 2 days had passed without any visitors, the captain major had this man seized and sent word to the king that he required the pilots whom he had promised. The king, when he received this message, sent a Christian pilot, and the captain major allowed the gentleman whom he had retained in his vessel to go away. We were much pleased with the Christian pilot whom the king had sent us. We learnt from him that the island of which we heard at Mozambique as being inhabited by Christians was in reality an island subject to this same king of Mozambique, that half of it belonged to the Moors and the other half to the Christians, that many pearls were to be found there, and that it was called Kilwa. This is the island of the Moorish pilots wanted to take us to, and we also wished to go there, for we believed that what they were saying was true. The town of Malindi lies in the bay and extends along the shore. It may be likened to Elkashute. Its houses are lofty and well whitewashed, and have many windows. On the land side are palm groves, and all around it maize and vegetables are being cultivated. We remained in front of this town during 9 days, and all this time we had fetes, sham fights, and musical performances. So it's time for me to put this all into context. Malindi is on the east coast of Africa in Kenya, and it used to be higher up, but then it moved lower because the kingdom died 3 times by the time the Portuguese had already gotten there. So, to put it into context, you can see there 2 things happened. One, the Portuguese had bombards of their own, which they placed on the side of their boats to guard against people who are hostile. But this did not stop them from trusting the king, because, of course, they had discourse with the king of Malindi. Now, the king of Malindi also had discourse with these Indians. How do we know? Well, it's written there. They wanted to throw that word, fete, means a party or a festival for the Christians, the Portuguese Christians. So the Indians wanted to throw a party for the Portuguese Christians, thinking that they had, met other Christians, and so they asked permission from the king of Malindi, if at night they can hold this festival. Now, I don't know about you, but if there's a whole festival where at night they start throwing fireworks in the air, the Indians, then it's pretty hard to not notice, if you're a native, that there's literally bombs going off on your waters and on your shore, which is what happened in these festivals. And of course, Vasco da Gama mentions that for 9 days this happened after they acquired a pilot sent by the king of Malindi. The king of Malindi sent a pilot. So where do they get this idea that this pilot comes from Gujarat? Well, it's some scholar suggested it. Some scholars suggested that he must have been an Indian because he knew the path to India, but this was not the case. The guy is a native Swahili who came from, like every other person who's mentioned, Swahili, otherwise known as the coast of Africa, the east coast of Africa. why would this person necessarily, or why would this person find himself being anything other than that? And also, every time you notice, they mention when somebody is of a different race than the local population. The only people that don't mention the race of is the local population. Like they don't mention the race of the king, for example, because of course he's native to that land. They don't mention the race of so many other people, but they do start mentioning it when it matters. Like the Indians that were the Christian Indians that were on the shore, who were surprised to find out that a Christian had arrived on these shores. And again, they threw a festival for this person to show that. Now, again, these people have been traveling for years to this region. It's not the first time they bring these bombards. So clearly, these people of Malindi had known about these bombards. In fact, it is speculated that they were gifted to these people at the time. And we know that Kilwa had bombards. So they must have had them for years and years. It says at the end, we left Malindi on Tuesday, the 24th of the month, for a city called Calicut, with the pilot whom the king had given us. The coast there runs north and south, and the land encloses a huge bay with a strait. From this point on, Vasco da Gama mentions traveling from one part of the sea to the other. And the reason why it's so easy is because he was given a local pilot who traveled to India, obviously prior to this date. Otherwise, he wouldn't know where he's going. Clearly, this person has been to India. But there's two other things that happens as well, which is when he gets there, the king is like, okay, where's my gold? When he gets to India, when he gets to Calicut, and he meets the Zamarin says, where's my gold? I want my gold. Because the Africans, when they travel to India as a gift of like, okay, we're coming here, they produce gold. But when Vasco da Gama produces sugar and stuff like that, the king of India, well, the king of this part of India, this light, small region of India, is not impressed. So, to address the suggestion that this pilot was a native of India, let's read this part. Which prevailed whilst we were sailing along the sea coast. Our pilot was unable to identify the exact locality on Sunday. We found ourselves close to some mountains, and when we were near enough for our pilot to recognize them, he told us that they were above Calicut and that this was the country we desired to go. That night we anchored 2 leagues from the city of Calicut, and we did so because our pilot mistook Kapua, a town at that place, for Calicut. Still further, there is another town called Pandarani. We anchored about 1.5 leagues from the shore. After we were at anchor, 4 boats approached us from the land, who asked of what nation we were. We told them, and they then pointed out Calicut to us. So here's the evidence. One, this guy doesn't even know that he's not in Calicut. They say in some of the notes that this guy is a native of Gujarat. How's that possible? This guy doesn't even know exactly which town is which. He kind of knows India. He knew where to go and how to get there, but he didn't know exact cities and exact places. Now, if he's a native of India, why doesn't he know? They had to ask people. Once he gets off the boat, he should have known by then. But even there, you see that it's only after they ask the foreigners who they were that they get the real answer. And then to carry on and say, on the following day, these same boats came along again alongside when the captain major sent one of the convicts to Calicut, and those with whom he went took him to two Moors from Tunis, from Tunisia, who could speak Castilian and Genoese or Guineas, I don't know how to say the word. The first greeting that he received was in these words: "May the devil take thee! What brought you hither?" They asked what he sought so far away from home, and he told them that we came in search of Christians and of spices. They said, and then it carries on. But you can see here, obviously, other Africans who had traveled to India, and they're pissed at the fact that the Europeans had finally landed in India. And in fact, the story goes on that they tell the native Indians that they are pirates. Now, there's a guy called Barrows, that's his last name, who he's responsible for throwing out a lot of misinformation. One claiming that the temple at Melinda was erected by Vasco da Gama, which has been disproven, and two saying that this guy is native to India, which again I just disproved easily because it's not true. It just it didn't work. But even if it was true, you can see there that there's a whole bunch of connection between Melinda. I mean, this guy was literally the in the holding of the king of Melinda. The king of Melinda sent him out. But if you require more information, Abdur Zarek or Razak, another historian, wrote, and he's from Persia, he wrote, the ambassador of Persia Empire, Shah Rukh, finds the city harbor perfectly secured and notices precious articles from several maritime countries, especially from Abyssinia, Zerbad, and Zanzibar. And here he's talking about Calicut. He says what he notices in Calicut, what Abdur Razak says that Shah Rukh notices in the harbor city of Calicut is that there's a lot of articles that came from Abyssinia, Zerbad, and Zanzibar. Zanzibar obviously being the Swahili coast. A very important thing to make sure you look at is the date 1442 to 1443. Now, I think I should read the whole context of the first time he gets to Melinda and gets out of Melinda because I just read you the part where they talk about the bombards because obviously that's the part I'm most interested in the fact that Indians and Chinese and Arabs have been bringing fireworks and trading fireworks with Africa for as long as fireworks were being used, which is about, let's say, at that time, about 200 years that they've been used extensively. The assertion that the people who were at this place, not from Malindi, who went to India, is because of the common belief at the time that it took a high level of intelligence that Africans didn't have in order to go to these places. So we know that that's bunk, but let's read the whole thing in order to get a full context of why I'm saying what I'm saying. We left in the morning, April 13, the wind being light and anchored about 8 leagues from Mombasa, so close to the shore. At break of day, April 14, we saw two boats about 3 leagues to the leeward in the open sea and at once gave chase with the intention of capturing them, for we wanted to secure a pilot who would guide us to where we wanted to go. At vesper time, we came up with one of them and captured it, the other escaping towards the land. In the one we took, we found 17 men, besides gold, silver, and an abundance of maize and other provisions, as also a young woman who was the wife of an old Moor of distinction, who was a passenger. When we came up with the boat, they all threw themselves into the water, but we picked them up from our boats. That same day, April 14, at sunset, we cast anchor off a place called Malindi, which is 30 leagues from Mombasa. The following places are between Mombasa and Malindi: Benapta, Benapa, Toka, and Naguaquanete. On Easter Sunday, April 15, the Moors whom we had taken in the boat told us that there were at this city of Melinda 4 vessels belonging to Christians from India, and that if it pleased us to take them there, they would provide us instead of them Christian pilots and all we stood in need of, including water, wood, and other things. The captain major much desired to have a pilot from the country, and having discussed the matter with his Moorish prisoners, he cast anchor off the town at a distance of about half a league from the mainland. The inhabitants of the town did not venture to come aboard our ships, for they had already learnt that we had captured a vessel and made her occupants prisoners. On Monday morning, April 16, the captain major had the old Moor taken to a sand in front of the town, where he was picked up by the Almada. The Moor explained to the king the wishes of the captain major, and how much he desired to make peace with him. After dinner, the Moor came back in a zevra, accompanied by one of the king's cavaliers and a sheriff. He also brought 3 sheep. These messengers told the captain general that the king would rejoice to make peace with him and to enter into friendly relations, that he would willingly grant to the captain major all his countries afforded, whether pilots or anything else. The captain major upon this sent word that he proposed to enter the port on the following day, and forwarded by the king's messengers a present consisting of a balandrao, 2 strings of a coral, 3 wash-hand basins, a hat, little bells, and 2 pieces of lambo. Consequently, on Tuesday, April 17, we approached nearer to the town. The king sent the captain major 6 sheep, besides quantities of cloves, cumin, ginger, nutmeg, and pepper, as also a message telling him that if he desired to have an interview with him, he, the king, would come out in the Hizavra, when the captain major could meet him in a boat. On Wednesday, April 18, after dinner, when the king came upon close to the ships in the Zavra, the captain major at once entered one of the boats, which had been well furnished, and many friendly words were exchanged when they lay side by side. The king, having invited the captain major to come to the house to rest, after which he would visit him on board his ship, the captain major said that he was not permitted by his master to go on land, and if he were to do so, a bad report would be given of him. The king wanted to know what would be said of himself by his people if he were to visit the ships, and what account could he render them. He then asked for the name of our king, which was written down for him, and said that on our return he would send an ambassador with us, or a letter. When both had said all they desired, the captain major sent for the Moors whom he had taken prisoner, and surrendered them all. This gave much satisfaction to the king, who said that he valued this act more highly than if he had been presented with a town. And the king, much pleased, made the circuit of our ships, the bombards of which fired a salute. About 3 hours were spent in this way. When the king went away, he left in a ship one of his sons and a sharif, and took two of us away with him, to whom he desired to show his place. He moreover told the captain that as he would not go ashore, he would himself return on the following day to the beach, and would order his horsemen to go through some exercises. The king wore a robe, a damask trimmed with a green satin, and a rich tuka. He was seated on the two cushioned chairs of bronze beneath a round sunshade of crimson satin attached to a pole. An old man who attended him as a page carried a short sword in a silver sheath. There were many players on anvils and two trumpets of ivory, richly carved, and of the size of a man, which were blown from a hole in the side and made sweet harmony with the anvils. On Thursday, April 19th, the captain major and Niccolo Colwe rowed along the front of the town, bombards having been placed in the poops of their long boats. Many people were along the shore, and among them 2 horsemen, who appeared to take much delight in the sham fight. The king was carried in a palanquin from the stone steps of his palace to the side of the captain major's boats. He again begged the captain to come ashore, as he had a helpless father who wanted to see him, and that he and his sons would go on board the ships as hostages. The captain, however, excused himself. We found here 4 vessels belonging to Indian Christians. When they came for the first time on board Paulo de Gama's ships, the captain major being there at the time, they were shown an altarpiece representing Our Lady at the foot of the cross, with Jesus Christ in her arms and the apostle around her. When the Indians saw this picture, they prostrated themselves, and as long as we were there, they came to say their prayers in front of it, bringing offerings of cloves, pepper, and other things. These Indians are tawny men. They wear but little clothing, and have long beards and long hair, which they braid. They told us that they ate no beef. Their language differs from that of the Arabs, but some of them know a little of it, as they hold much intercourse with them. On the day on which the captain major went up to the town in the boats, these Christians Indians fired off many bombards from their vessels, and when they saw him pass, they raised their hands and shouted lustfully, Christ, Christ. That same night they asked the king's permission to give us a night feast. And when night came, they fired off many bombards, sent up rockets, and raised loud shouts. These Indians warned the captain major against going on shore, and told him not to trust to their fanfares, as they neither came from their hearts nor from their goodwill. On the following Sunday, the 22nd of April, the king Zavra brought on board one of his confidential servants, and as 2 days had passed without any visitors, the captain major had this man seized and sent word to the king that he required the pilots whom he had promised the king. When he received this message, sent a Christian pilot, and the captain major allowed the gentleman whom he had retained in his vessel to go away. Now, if you don't realize, the picture that he's painting of Malindi is a pretty beautiful one if you think about it. For example, he says that the king was walking on stone steps, And then he also says that the town of Melinda is painted in white, as you can see there. It may be linked to Alcachet or Alcachet. Its houses are lofty and well whitewashed and have many windows. On the land side are palm groves, and all around it maize and vegetables are being cultivated. You'll notice that in the other one where it says there was a lot of maize, they put an X on it because they didn't want to show you how African it was. But the whole thing is about how sophisticated this place was before Europeans really got here and they traded. By the way, there's no evidence that this place had ever been conquered by anyone outside. It was just simple trade. In fact, we know that this place was one of those few places that remained Christian. Had they been conquered by outsiders, why would they be Christian?